Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. If you're new here, my name is Katie, I'm a full-time sketchbook artist, and today we are testing and comparing different types of watercolour pencil. Technically one of these is water soluble, not watercolour, but I think it's really helpful to see the different applications and exactly why they're different. So I do hope this video is helpful if you're looking for watercolour pencils or just really interested in the different brands. Obviously there are so many out there and I'm only testing 3 today, but I have plenty of tests to do. We're going to see how they layer, how they blend, how they work with the water and without. So I'm going to stop rambling because there's plenty to share in today's video. So I hope you find this one useful and let's get on with it. Okay, so I've got my pencils ready. I'm going to be doing my tests in this mixed media sketchbook because I know that obviously we want to add water, so I want to make sure the paper can handle that. I've got my 3 different brands here. Now I've picked out 12 colours for each, but these don't necessarily match the packs of 12 that you can buy. The Albrecht Dürer and the Prismalo I bought by auction, so this was in one of my auction art supply hauls. If you've not seen those, I'll link them up above, but it does mean that the colours don't necessarily match because I didn't buy them as a specific set of 12. But I've tried to match them as much as I can, and I've just picked 12 colours that are pretty similar from all 3 brands. So I'm going to talk you through the prices and the brands themselves, but they all claim to be light fast, so definitely the Albrecht Dürer and the Prismalo claim to be very light fast. The Inktense, they claim to be 87% light fast. Before I start, I do want to say that the Derwent Inktense are different from other watercolour pencils. They're not really watercolour, but they are water soluble. And I often get asked which ones I recommend. And so I wanted to include them in this because I do think that they can be used maybe instead of watercolour pencils. So although they're not technically watercolour pencils, Derwent has their own separate watercolour pencil. I wanted to include Derwent Inktense just to really show you the differences. And to me, I think it's helpful to have these different brands to be able to compare. So that's probably the only difference. The Prismalo claim to be the very first water-soluble colour pencil. They're from Caran d'Ache. So we've got Derwent, Caran d'Ache, and then the Albrecht Dürer are by Faber-Castell. I'm going to put on screen some of the details. So with the Derwent Inktense, there is a range of 99 different colours. There's a set of 100 that you can buy, but one of those is an outliner pencil. So technically we've got 99 shades. A set of 12 retails at £23.50. Then we've got the Faber-Castell Albrecht Dürer. These have a colour selection of 120 colours and they come in at a set of 12 for £22.50. So not much difference between those. And then we've got the Prismalo, which is by Caran d'Ache, and they have a colour range of 80, so a little bit less. And I've seen those go online from between £20 to £30, so there's a bit of a difference there depending on where you buy them. But basically all of these come in around the £23 mark. I would say 25 maybe average for the Prismalo. But as I said, it does depend on where you buy them. Now Prismalo, being the first water-soluble colour pencil worldwide, which is what they claim, actually are more student grade. So I want to see the comparison there because even though they are marketed as student grade, they're the same price as the others. So it's going to be really interesting to test those out. I'm going to show you some close-ups as we go, but they're pretty similar in how they look except for the Derwent Inktense. So we've got full colour barrels on the Faber-Castell and the Prismalo, and we've only got the tip on the Derwent Inktense. So it might be a little bit more difficult to find the specific colours if you've got them in a pencil case compared to the other 2, but if you've got them standing in a pot, then you've got the ends to be able to see them. As I said at the beginning, we're going to be doing lots of tests, so we're going to be using them without water because I think it's really important to test them as they are if you're going to take them plein air to be able to have that versatility. We're going to use them with water obviously and see how they layer with each other for new shades. And I just want to test out the high pigmentation that they all claim to have. So we're going to test that out. The light fastness I can't test, and it is different depending on dilution. So I don't think it would be a fair test because I can't be really specific with it. But as I said, they do claim to be light fast. The Derwent Inktense probably a little bit less, but that's not something I'm going to test today. Okay, so I think that's everything about the coloured pencils, so let's get into our experiments. Okay, let's start with the Faber-Castell Albrecht Dürer. I'm just going to swatch them. I think it's helpful to do different colours because it's interesting to see if the different pigments change the feel of the pencil. And I'm going to do this without water. So they feel very smooth to go down. I think the pigmentation feels really good just for as they are dry. Okay, they felt really nice to go down. I'm just going to label these up. I accidentally swatched the green one twice, so we can ignore that because I wasn't paying attention. We do just have the 2 greens, not 3. So these are the allll. And yeah, they're really pigmented. They go down really smoothly. It still feels quite soft, which is really nice. I don't really like hard leaded pencils. I'm going to leave a gap underneath because I want to test them out with the water. So let's move on to the Prismalo. And I'm going to do the exact same thing and swatch these all out. Okay, these definitely feel a lot harder. They're certainly not as soft as the allll. They don't really feel like watercolour pencils in comparison. But it's going to be really interesting to see what happens when I do add in the water. These are really hard. Ooh. Because I got these from auction, I'm just going to see if sharpening this helps because the colour has not come down on the paper very well. It's come out quite grey, so let's just sharpen this and see. No, okay, that's really odd. That's really not coming out as a turquoise as it's showing. It's kind of coming out as a dull, like grey green. So we'll test that out with the water, see if the pigment comes out then. That one feels a bit softer, that brown. Got a couple of browns here. I didn't have a sort of olive green to test either. It's just that turquoise one that's come out weird. They do feel quite pigmented. The yellow again was quite soft. The blues were not as soft. We're definitely softening up as we go. Okay, here are the Prismalo. So the blues were definitely the hardest feeling of the lead. It definitely felt a little bit softer with some of these other colours. I definitely prefer the softness of these compared to like the scratchiness of these ones. I also can't count. Not only did I do 2 of the green, I've also picked out 13 of the allll. But it's pretty similar in terms of the colours. So we've got 12 of these. I don't have a white to test. But let's do a swatch of the Derwent Inktense, which I think is going to be really interesting to see the difference. Okay, so really for these I want to test how it feels without the water because I mostly use these with water. So let's start with the blues again. Okay, so there does feel a bit more resistance with these. It's definitely not quite as soft or as buttery going down as the allll, but there's still a lot of pigment coming off. It's definitely still applying a lot of colour to the page. That's interesting. So I can't really tell the difference between the black and the brown here. That is a quite dark brown, but I think the colour will become more apparent when I am adding the water. Okay, some of these feel a lot softer again, just like with the Prismalos. I think it does depend on the pigment going down. Okay, so here are our swatches. I would say that the allll definitely felt the softest. With the Inktense, I think that there is a bit more pigment. The colours definitely feel a bit more intense. And it will be interesting to see just how much the water changes some of these. So I'm going to swatch them all again underneath, and then we're going to add water and just see exactly how that changes things, because sometimes the pigments can become more vibrant or more intense, and I really want to see the difference. Once again, I swatched things twice here, so we're just going to ignore that. Okay, so let's start with the allll. So yeah, that comes up really, really nicely. Not pressing hard at all. We're going to do a test in a minute of like blending together as well, but you can also see that it's not really keeping the original marks, so you can kind of blend those out really, really nicely. When I first started using watercolour pencils with other brands, I found that you kind of saw the marks beneath, whereas I'm not seeing that here. It's really dissolving all of them really, really nicely, and I'm getting a really good amount of pigment up. I've ignored the ones where I've accidentally swatched them twice. Yeah, the colour payoff is really good. I'm really impressed with how I'm not getting those initial marks as well. I'm skipping the white. There's no point doing that because I don't have whites on the others and you can't really see it on this paper. And then lastly the red. Oh, that's really vibrant. Okay, so those were the allll. Let's test the Prismalos. I'm really keen to see that turquoise, but we've got the blues first. Oh wow, okay. There is no contest there. I'm really struggling to get the pigment. Okay, that one's a little bit better. I'm having to scrub a little bit harder on the pigment to get it up, but yeah, let's see. There's something wrong with that turquoise. I'm getting nothing there. This purple, okay, that's better. That's much better. I can still see a little bit of the marks underneath. Let's test these browns. Okay, so some are better than others, but I would say the pigment it feels very, very different. Because these were like the first ones, maybe the formulation has changed because I got them from auction. I don't know when these Prismalo pencils are from. Really interesting to see the difference. That yellow's worked the best, I think, out of all of them. I can still definitely see the like square that I put down first. And they're certainly not as an intense colour. These ones feel a bit more muted than the ones above, except for this pink. That's worked really well. Definitely the brighter colours seem to work better. I can scrub a little bit more to get the marks from above to blend in a little bit more. Okay, that was really interesting. And now for the ink tints. I might have done these the wrong way around. I wasn't sure with the brown, so let's see. Okay. Yeah, really a huge amount of pigment there. These are coming up really, really vibrant. And again, just like with the allll Dura, I'm not having to press too much to get the colour up, especially with that black. Ink tense, definitely right. It doesn't feel as much like watercolour because the colour coming off is much more opaque compared to like how watercolour would be, which is why they're not technically watercolour pencils, they're water soluble. We've got the green. The colour does change quite a lot as well there. You can really see a difference between the swatch that went down quite dark versus this sort of olivey colour that's come up. I can still see some of the marks. I'm presuming this one wouldn't be quite as light fast. Let's see if I can work that in. Yeah, I think I can work them out, but I think it's very on par with the amount of pigment. The colour definitely changes a bit more. We've got our red. And we've got the orange. Okay, so these are all of our swatches. That was really interesting. The Prismalo definitely feel the least pigmented. It was quite a struggle to get some pigment up and really hard to get rid of, especially on the harder pencils, some of these initial marks. It was a lot easier on the brighter colours, but you can see how muted and transparent I guess these feel most like a wash of watercolour, but it was definitely a lot harder to get the pigment up, and I have no idea what's wrong with this turquoise pencil. As I said, I don't know what year these are from, and I did try sharpening. The allll Dura, they went down really buttery and nice and really soft, and then I did get quite a lot of pigment up. These ones feel most like watercolour, and then obviously we've got the ink tints, which feels a lot more intense, as the name would suggest, and less like watercolour. I think these are definitely a bit more opaque. Obviously they're still water soluble, but I would say if you want a more vibrant, then these are definitely better. But I really like the softness still of the allll Dura. So let's do a test of blending some of these together and creating new shades, because I don't think you need a whole set. Obviously these do come with quite a wide colour selection, but I want to see if we just took a few, so if I took a yellow and a blue, just how well we can make a green. So let's start with the allll Dura again. Let's do the yellow first. So I want this to be a good test. And then I'm going to do the blue underneath. Actually, let's test it as well with the yellow down and then just the blue on top, just because I want to see how it blends dry. If I can make a green just from it dry. Yeah, that's definitely green. So we've got, let's do this one as a wet blend and this one as a dry. Then we'll do the Prismalo next. So I'll put down the yellow and the blue underneath. And this one I'll put the blue on top. Yep, again, so I can definitely see the green there. I can also see more of my scratchier marks because the lead is harder. And then let's do the ink tints. Okay, I'm just swapping to a brighter yellow just to make this a fairer test. I'm going to swap to a different blue as well, just so that we can see it's a bit fairer. And then the yellow down first and the blue on top. Okay. So you can see there where this is picking up a bit more of the texture of the page. So you can really see a lot of texture there compared to over here where it's blended a little bit better with the colour. So there's definitely a difference with the ink tints versus the feel of these, which the allll Dura and the Prismalo feel more like pencils that you can just use dry. So now let's get our wet brush and we'll see how these combine. Nice. Yeah, definitely feels like quite thick paint. That feels really nice. I am keeping the water I'm not putting loads of water on, but yeah, that's blended really, really nicely. Let's move on to Prismalo. Okay, yeah, so this is where you can really see I'm struggling to get the marks and the colour up. And you can really see it's kind of pilling the paper because I'm really trying to get that blue up, but you can definitely see it's made a green, but I can still see the blue underneath. And it's made a bit of a mess there. And then the ink tints. Yeah. Nice. Okay, so that's blended nicely as well. I would say actually it feels a bit more wet there. Maybe I used a bit more water, but interestingly the texture is very different. Just like we found when it was dry, the texture of the Albrecht Dürer is very different to that. So let's do another test for that, because that's quite interesting. So let's test out a red and a blue. I really enjoy testing things like this. I find it really helpful, and just playing with supplies. So let's put down a red and a blue Albrecht Dürer, red and a blue Prismalo. You can really see the difference there as well in like lead thickness because of the softness. So you can see just how thick I can get down with that one compared to the Prismalo. So I just want to do, okay, we're making a brown, not a purple. So that's with quite a lot of water. And this one, this is really interesting. Barely anything coming up there. And then the ink tints. Okay, we're getting much more of a purple there. Very different colours from the pigments. Obviously I didn't match them perfectly, but I'm definitely getting more of a brown here. But you can see with the water, I'm getting more like watercolour effects than I am certainly with the Prismalo and with the ink tints, because as I keep saying, that's not technically a watercolour pencil. But this is interesting. I'm definitely getting like the bloom from the water that you get with watercolour anyway. So that's really helpful to see. And now I'm going to put down some acrylic and some gouache to see how it layers on top of other mediums. Okay, so I've put down some gouache and some acrylic, and I've also got some watercolour on another page because I want to see how these layer. You might put watercolour pencils on top of gouache. I don't know if you would on acrylic. Maybe you would if you pre-prepped your page. Probably not these colours, but I thought it would be good to see a real comparison on a light colour and a dark colour. So this is primary yellow and primary blue in gouache and in acrylic. So I just wanted to see how they would fare. So we've got the pinks here from each of the brands. So I'm going to just put them on. So Albrecht Dürer. You can kind of, it's showing a bit more pink in real life. I'll do a close-up for the angle. So it's definitely showing pink. It's showing up a lot bluer on the overhead camera. And then the acrylic, same. Yes, same here. So in some lights, depending on the angle, it's showing up a little bit better. But it's still layered really nicely. So I also want to see how that feels when it's wet. But we'll do that at the bottom. So let's go on to our Prismacolor. Pretty similar. Very similar actually. Prismalo, what did I call it? Prismala. Very similar for that one. And then the ink tints. You're probably a bit darker than the other ones. The camera's kind of washing out the primary blue. It really struggles, I think, with like really bright colours. But let's do the final test and do the exact same thing, but I want to put a little bit more on and then apply some water on top. So we'll start again with the Albrecht Dürer, the Prismalo, and the ink tints. Now, gouache is water activated, so it might pick up some of the yellow, but I just want to see what happens. Yeah, wow, that's really mixed in with the gouache underneath. So that was the Albrecht Dürer. And the Prismalo again. So that's really interesting. The Prismalos come up a lot better on the gouache than it did when it was just on the paper. So I wonder if having that barrier works better for the Prismalo. And underneath we've got the Derwent ink tints. Yeah, wow, that's a really intense colour. Okay, let's do the same on the darker blue gouache. Okay, struggling a little bit there. You can see the pink's kind of coming through. the harder lead works better here. And then the Inktense. You can see here it's kind of gone really grainy on top with the allll compared to the Prismalo, and a little bit grainy on the Derwent Inktense at the bottom. Let's add our water. Yeah, so mostly, let's see the colour there. That has changed the colour. It's mostly picking up the blue gouache underneath because it is a darker colour. We've got the Prismalo. Oh, that's made a really nice purple. That's really interesting. The Prismalo's worked much better on the gouache. And then the Inktense. Again, we've got 3 shades of purple there where it's mixed with the gouache, so there's definitely some pigment on there. Let's do the exact same with the acrylic. So we've got our pink. Interestingly, that's layered a lot better colour-wise on the acrylic than it did with the gouache. Got our Prismalo. Again, lays really nicely on top. And the Inktense. And now we add our water. So this won't mix in with the yellow underneath because the acrylic is dry. So it will just sit on top with that water. Got the Prismalo. Wow, way more intensity on the Prismalo here. And the Inktense. Yeah, the Inktense definitely doesn't have that watery effect like the other two. Let's do it on the blue. Yeah, so that's just mixing it with water. So because the acrylic isn't water soluble, it's just laying there as sort of a barrier to the page. But it's amazing how much that's changed the Prismalos. Oh, a really dark sort of purple one there for the Inktense. So this is how they look. They're still wet at the moment, but that was really interesting. So you can really see the barrier with the acrylic. Definitely see all that water that I added. So as I said, I don't know how much you would use watercolour pencils on top of acrylic, but it does work. It's just obviously it's got that resistance from the water. So you would probably just use them dry like this, and then you could dilute them down. Because of the intensity of the Inktense, then obviously that happens a bit less. But it looks so different on the blue, which is really interesting. The Prismalo is doing really well there. Okay, now we're on to the watercolour. So this is probably the application that's most likely if you're not using them on their own. So let's start again with the allll. So yeah, that layers really nicely. I'm going to add some water as well. So you can layer this on top of watercolour you've already put down just to create more shades. And there's also a really nice softness there. Next up, the Prismalo. This is a slightly darker brown, but that feels quite nice. I'm interested to see how this layers because it might be similar to the acrylic. It might work better than just straight on the paper. Yeah, that's nice. So it is less intense, but you're still getting a really nice coverage there. And then last up we've got the Inktense. So these are all quite different shades of brown. Yeah, they layer really nicely. Let's do the blue next. These are standard professional watercolours. If you saw my watercolour palette setup video, it's from there. And I picked the darkest colour, so we've got this dark sepia here. It does go down really, really nicely. It's a really nice and buttery smooth. The Prismalo, let's go with sort of dark purple. Again, that feels a lot softer when it's on top of something. That feels quite nice. And then we'll pick the deep indigo for the Derwent Inktense. So this one definitely goes down a bit rougher. The pencil lines are not quite as smooth because the lead is very soft. So now to add the water. So that's the dark sepia, and we've got Prismalo. Definitely getting a bit more pigmentation than straight on the page. And the Inktense, which is, yeah, very intense. So I've got pencils all around the desk, but one of the ways that I enjoy using the Inktense specifically is dipping it in water and seeing how it reacts. So I want to test those out with the other coloured pencils too. I'm going to put down some water first and then apply them just to see how soft we can get the nib, and then I'll actually try applying water straight to the pencils. Okay, so I'm putting down water first and I'm going to go straight in with the allll. It is bleeding a little bit, so you can see that, and it does definitely soften the nib or the lead, and then you can definitely spread that out. So that's an interesting technique. That's definitely something that you could use. I can really feel I'm barely having to press it. So this is me using the same pressure next to it versus where I put the water. So it really does affect the lead there. Let's do the same with the Prismalo. So we'll put down the water and then I'll come in. Yeah, this is very different. So I can feel it a little bit more there. So this is on the water, and then this is without. Okay, so yeah, it's definitely affecting the nib more. If there's water, and I guess that tracks with the gouache that was put down as well, it softens the nib quite a lot. So that's really good to see. I prefer it, definitely prefer these Prismacolors on water than I do just on their own. And then lastly, the ink tints. So I put down the water, and then, oh, I didn't do the smudge test. Let's just see. So again, there's a definite difference from where it was on the wet versus not. And this one definitely smudges. So that's really interesting. I'm going to have to do that one again because I forgot to smudge it. But you can really see the difference in tone here. So this has become more of a yellow-green compared to where it went down dry, whereas the allll has stayed with that same colour. So there's definitely more colour accuracy with the dry and the wet for the Faber-Castell allll than with the ink tints. Let's just test that again with the Prismalo. So that's on the wet. It's smudging a bit, but it's pilling up the paper, so it's pilling a bit. So definitely not quite as good as the other ones, but I definitely do notice a difference in the softness where I've put down the water. It's just doesn't smudge as easily as the others. Okay, and then my last test is to actually dip the pencils in water. Technically, like, they don't recommend this. You're not supposed to do this because it does affect the barrel, the wooden barrel that houses the lead. But for me, I prefer to experiment in this way and I love the textures. So I'm going to test it anyway, and it's up to you if you choose to do it. But what's recommended is to apply water using a paintbrush. I just find it's a lot quicker to dip it straight into my water pot. And I'm just going to dip this in my water and go straight on the page. Okay, so you can see here where it kept the water and then it lost, like it lost that wetness. So let's do it again. Yeah, so like you can really see how much more intense it is up here with the water, and it picks up more of the paper texture over here. And you can see how much I dunked it in the water there, so you can see how wet that is. Okay, I'm going to do the same with the dunking with the Prismalo, but I'm not expecting much difference. Oh, I can feel it. I can feel it a little bit there, actually. Okay, yeah, so it definitely has. I wasn't quite in shot. Let's do that again. It definitely softens it. And again, you can see where the water sort of runs out. It's not quite as soft as the others, but it definitely creates a bit more like thickness there. You could kind of see where it's softened with the water. And then lastly with the ink tints. So again, just dipping it in the water. Yeah, again, so I think the allll got softer there. Let's do that again with the one underneath. Yeah, I can really feel that. And again, it kind of puts quite a thick pigment on there, which you can then soften out. And that will be the same with the allll, I'm sure. So let me see if I can show you. So here's the dough and ink tints. It's definitely hard to show you, but it kind of creates the pigment on the top where it softens it. And you can see how thick I can get that down, because whilst it's still wet, it's coming down almost like it's paint, as if I've put like a glob of gouache on there, and then see how intense that is. So I did do that with the Prismalo, but I didn't do that with the allll. So I just dipping it in the water and then getting the pigment on the page. yeah, it gets quite a lot down. So it is just like having a little glob of paint, and then it becomes even more intense. So definitely different ways that you can use this. As I said, it's probably not good for the lifespan of your pencils, but I haven't had any issues, and that's how I tend to use my Inktense. So that was really, really interesting. You can definitely see how they change with the water. Obviously they are all water soluble pencils, so it makes sense. But it's interesting to try out the little globules of, I mean that sounds weird, but the amount of pigment you can get with these pencils. I'm definitely still getting the exact same effect with the Prismalos, maybe just a little bit less intense. Oh, that's a little bit better. So yeah, really interesting to find these different ways to use watercolour pencils. I don't believe in rules, as you know. If you've been on my channel before, I tend to just experiment and play, and that's definitely what this has been, but I hope it's been helpful. So really interesting to see how different the Prismalo felt on some of the other ones, because when I did these tests I was thinking that they weren't that great, especially on this paper, but when I tested it with the other mediums underneath it fared a lot better. So let's do a little bit of a summary. So the Albrecht Dürer I think are really, really fantastic. I like the way that they feel more on their own than any of the others. Prismalo is quite close, but for me, I don't love the texture that the Inktense creates when they are used not wet. But I like the Albrecht Dürer. They kind of just feels like coloured pencils, whereas the Derwent Inktense don't. These definitely feel more watercolour-y than these, which are obviously more opaque. So I guess it depends on what you're after. If you want more opaque, like ink-like colour, obviously the Inktense makes sense. I do really enjoy using them, mostly when they're wet. The Prismalo I didn't love. Some of the pigments were definitely softer just on their own, but you can definitely see the difference in intensity here. And I couldn't soften out a lot of the initial marks, but when I was using it on top of the gouache, I could. So that was really interesting to see the difference there. Over here was the biggest difference. I really, really was impressed by how the Albrecht Dürer blended together. You can see how smooth that colour is compared to the texture here. So I guess it depends if you want more texture or if you want a smooth colour. Really impressed with the Albrecht Dürers here. And again, using them dry. The Prismalo wet just straight on the paper definitely created more pilling, so not as smooth of a blend there. But it did work quite well just dry on dry. And then I don't think this really worked with the dry on dry with the Inktense. They definitely work better with water. You can see that here when I just did the scribbles and added the water on top. Less so for the Prismalo, but this was really interesting to me. I mean, I must have used a bit more water, but it's interesting how much this feels like watercolour with that cauliflower bloom. And then yeah, testing it on top of the gouache. These have dried now. I would say that they all worked quite well on top of the gouache and the acrylic, but because the acrylic isn't water soluble, the water kind of just sat on top, which it didn't for the Inktense. So that worked better. If you're working on top of acrylic, I would recommend the Inktense. Yeah, really, really helpful, and I hope this has been helpful to watch as well. If you're picking watercolour pencils, I hope it's been useful to see what they do and what their strengths are. I know that there are thousands of different watercolour pencils out there with so many different brands, and I've obviously only covered 3 today, and one of them isn't technically like the Derwent watercolour pencil, but I hope it's been helpful. I definitely see a lot of these being used. I do wonder if the Caran d'Ache Supracolor would be have been a better test, but these are the watercolour pencils I had to hand. So do share your thoughts down below in the comments. If you have other recommendations, then definitely do share them. We've got such a wealth of knowledge in this community from all of the different art supplies we use, so please do share them with everybody too. A big thank you for watching. Thank you to my patrons for their support on this channel, and I will see you all next Sunday with a new YouTube video. See you later.